A social gathering was organized to strengthen the bond between the companies. As soon as Manager Will saw us at the venue, he said something unbelievable. "We haven't prepared a seat for you. Subcontractors can leave." "Then, can you call the president right now?" My wife Nancy quickly retorted, leaving Manager Will wide-eyed and speechless. "What? There's no way we can call the busy president for subcontractors. You're easily replaceable." "So, you can't call the president? Then we'll be leaving." Nancy grabbed my arm and headed for the exit. At that moment, President Smith of our client company appeared, and as he listened to the conversation, his face turned pale and he began to tremble. "My name is Joseph Davis. I'm 42 years old and live with my beloved wife, Nancy. I run a factory that manufactures machine parts, originally owned by my father-in-law. I met my wife Nancy during my college days. I have always been fond of machines since childhood, and I studied mechanical engineering in college, burning with youthful ambition to create something new for the future society. But reality was not so easy, and my experiments faced constant difficulties. Despite coming all the way from the countryside, I was repeatedly disappointed and discouraged, questioning my abilities, but I continued experimenting relentlessly. Even when I thought it was impossible and felt lost facing repeated challenges, Nancy was there by my side. Seeing me struggle with my experiments, she would quickly solve the problems and tell me, "Joseph, you were almost solving it too. The difference is whether you believe it can be done." Nancy's smile completely captured my heart. Approaching a task with the belief it can be done versus thinking it can't makes a difference in the outcome. Nancy taught me this, and from then on, I tackled everything without giving up until the end. As a result, I developed a strong mentality that even without much basis or experience, if you give it your all, you can make it work somehow. Telling myself that it would surely work out gave me the strength to endure to the end, which became a significant force in overcoming various trials in my life. Nancy herself seemed to possess this vitality. One day, Nancy quietly spoke to me. "I have a dream." "A dream?" I asked, unable to predict what she would say, and Nancy firmly nodded. "My dream is to make my father's factory the best in the USA." In the end, Nancy and I spent our college days as good friends. After graduation, I got a job at a local machine manufacturing factory. I resonated with their pursuit of more precise and advanced technology while conducting technical research. That's where I reunited with my college classmate, Nancy. To my surprise, the factory was run by Nancy's father. While working hard to get accustomed to the job as quickly as possible, Nancy's father, the president, spoke to me. "So, you're the new guy. I've heard you're quite dedicated to your work." "Thank you. I'm excited to work with machines every day." I passionately talked to the president about my enthusiasm for manufacturing. I spoke about the expertise I had learned in college and the potential of the manufacturing industry in the USA. Looking back, I realized I was quite ambitious. However, the president listened to me attentively without interrupting. "I'm glad to have a passionate young person like you in our company. How about learning even more?" With that suggestion, the president began to mentor me closely from then on. Thus, I started learning directly from the president. "Joseph, you don't have a girlfriend, right?" "No, I don't have one now." One day, the president suddenly asked me this, and Nancy's smile from our college days crossed my mind. "How about my daughter Nancy? You're close in age, and she understands the factory's work well." Thus, our relationship, which I thought would always be just friendship, slowly progressed, and after about 2 years of dating, we got married. We bonded over our goal to make my father-in-law's factory the best in the USA, enjoying a happy married life. However, one day, my father-in-law suddenly collapsed. Fortunately, I was nearby, so I quickly called an ambulance and he was taken to the hospital. Although his life was saved, his body was significantly weakened due to a pre-existing heart condition. I'm sorry to worry you, but I've seen my daughter as a bride, and I have a successor for the factory. Honestly, I have no regrets." Lying in the hospital's white bed, my father-in-law said this with a pale face. But of course, we couldn't accept this. We, along with the entire factory, worked hard to manage it until my father-in-law could return. As a result, he gradually regained his health and was able to return to the factory 3 months later. However, even though he recovered this time, we never know when it might happen again. At my father-in-law's request, I officially took over the factory while he was still healthy. I had been working there and learning the ropes as a manager next to him, but I still struggled initially. During that time, I must have looked pretty bad when I got home, and Nancy was worried. "Are you okay? You're not overdoing it, are you?" "It's tough, but I want to live up to Dad's expectations. Besides, I want to learn as much as I can now so I won't be underestimated as a young manager." When the transition from my father-in-law to me happened, some clients tried to take advantage of us. But with Nancy's support and my father-in-law's trust, I managed to keep going. 2 years flew by, and just as I was getting used to managing, we found out Nancy was pregnant. Our son was born safely, and we named him Tom. My father-in-law cried tears of joy while holding Tom. Seeing my father-in-law, Nancy, and baby Tom together made me smile naturally. Having my precious son gave me even more motivation. This newfound drive helped me work harder, discover my unique management style, and overcome various challenges. About 10 years later, I heard that our main client's manager, David, had been transferred, and I was puzzled. It was an odd time for a personnel change, and David, who was in charge of our account, had shown no signs of this. Curious about what happened to David, I asked another acquaintance at our client company, and apparently he was dismissed. I was shocked, wondering what major mistake he had made, but I was even more surprised to hear that the exact reason was not disclosed. As a subcontractor, I couldn't find out more, so I decided to wait for the new manager. I heard the new manager's name was Will Anderson, around my age. Unlike me, he was reputed to be an elite graduate from a prestigious university. So I prepared myself for a long-term relationship with him. Though I was saddened by David's departure, I knew I had to go and greet the new manager first. When I contacted our client to arrange a meeting with the new manager, I realized I should inform my father-in-law as well. So that's what happened. I'll look into it on my end. You focus on the factory work. My father-in-law said, with a complicated expression I'd never seen before. The situation changed the next day. As usual, I was giving work instructions and making rounds in the factory when a man appeared. I didn't recognize him at all, and as I wondered who he was, he walked briskly toward me. "I'm Will, the new manager. I've taken over this factory's account from my predecessor." "So, you're Manager Will. I look forward to working with you." I greeted politely to Manager Will, who looked down at me with his arms crossed. However, Manager Will didn't respond and stared at me rudely. "You didn't even think to offer me tea when I went out of my way to come here." "I'm sorry. That was inconsiderate of me." Under his cold gaze, I quickly prepared tea. From my experience, people like him are best handled by showing humility and respect. They usually leave satisfied without causing trouble. As I handed him the tea with a smile, Manager Will seemed to improve his mood as expected. He leaned back, sipping the tea with a smug look, eyeing me unpleasantly. "Seems like you understand your position." David, on the other hand, always greeted me with a friendly smile and thanked me for my hard work. In contrast, Manager Will crossed his arms and inspected the factory. I started feeling uneasy, realizing this wouldn't be easy. "How are you doing, dear?" Nancy arrived with Tom, stopping suddenly as if surprised. Come to think of it, Nancy did mention she would stop by with Tom today. While I was recalling this, Manager Will said something unexpected. "What, Nancy, is that you?" Could it be Will? Both of them looked at each other in shock, and I was surprised too. It seemed they knew each other, but Manager Will continued, still in disbelief. Is that kid your son? So, you married a factory worker just because you're the factory owner's daughter? Yes, but what does it matter? Who I marry is none of your business, Will. Nancy easily brushed off Will's sudden rude remark and stood beside me with Tom. This is my husband. He's an important person who helps support this factory with me. Tom innocently showed me his elementary school quiz. I praised Tom with a smile, but I was taken aback by Manager Will's reaction. For a moment, I felt like he gave me an intense look. However, he quickly returned to a smirking expression and began to openly mock Nancy. You married a lowly worker for your family's factory. Don't you regret your life choices? Manager Will spoke down to both Nancy and me. I was quite irritated inside, but with Tom, still an elementary school student, watching, I struggled to keep my composure. At that moment, Nancy smiled brightly. I'm incredibly happy to be married to him. Her smile melted away my irritation, filling me with happiness instead. What a waste of time. Manager Will grumbled as he left the factory. That guy is something else. Really, it's annoying knowing someone like him. Nancy explained briefly that Manager Will was a high school classmate. Seeing her reluctance to talk further, I didn't press the issue. Still, I was troubled that such a difficult person had become our account manager. However, I soon forgot my complaints about Manager Will when we were informed about a major project. Our factory's products were going to play a crucial role, so I focused all my attention on that. However, just when things were going well, I received another call from Manager Will. Thinking it was about the project, I nervously picked up the phone, but what he said was incomprehensible. What was that attitude last time? I couldn't believe the disrespect when I, the manager, came personally. I apologize for any offense caused. I apologized, but Manager Will continued to rant. Unlike a subcontractor like you, I have a promising future. Remember, I can stop our business with a single word. He hung up after saying whatever he wanted. I was stunned that he called just to say this. Then another employee called. Apparently, there was a social gathering to be held among the involved companies to ensure the project's success. They were informing each company, and seeing Manager Will's call, they quickly confirmed with us. Because of his complaints and not mentioning the gathering, I almost missed it. I thanked the employee and checked my schedule. I had just enough time, but the thought of seeing Manager Will at the gathering made me sigh. On the day of the gathering, I arrived early just in case. I attended with my wife, Nancy, and looked around to see if I recognized anyone. Since it was still early, people were scattered around, and I heard a familiar voice from behind. Why is a lowly worker from a poor factory here? It was Manager Will who spotted me and called out. I thought it was troublesome to deal with him, but couldn't ignore him. Manager Will laughed, looking at Nancy and me with disdain. Why are you here? Can't you see you're out of place? Everyone here is an executive from a reputable company. There's no place for subcontractors like you. As he laughed loudly, people around us began to take notice. I tried to excuse myself with a polite smile and a nod to Manager Will. Excuse me, I need to greet others. I'm not done talking yet. I attempted to avoid him, but he seemed determined not to let us go. As I worried about the situation, Manager Will approached, looking down at me with a mocking laugh. We haven't prepared a seat for you. Subcontractors can leave. Then, can you call the president right now? Nancy quickly retorted, making Manager Will's eyes widen in surprise. What? There's no way we can call the busy president for subcontractors. You can be replaced easily. So, you can't call the president. Then we'll withdraw from the project. With that, Nancy took my arm and headed for the exit. Manager Will looked pleased with himself, showing no intention of stopping us. It was at that moment. Joseph. The voice that called out to me in a puzzled tone was Robert Smith. the president of our client company. I stopped and smiled to President Smith. President Smith, you arrived early. I heard Joseph would be here, so I thought I'd come early to greet him and catch up on how he's doing. By him, he probably meant my father-in-law. My father-in-law and President Smith have known each other for over 30 years since the company was established. But I heard that they had seen less of each other since my father-in-law's health declined and I took over as president. Still, why are you leaving? The social gathering is about to start. Actually, I explained everything to President Smith, even though I thought it might be pointless. I didn't have much of a relationship with President Smith. I was just a subcontractor. It wouldn't have been surprising if he had laughed at me. But I hoped for the long-standing friendship between President Smith and my father-in-law. As President Smith listened to my story, his face gradually turned pale, and he began to tremble. I'm sorry, this is entirely Will's fault. I'll deal with him as you see fit. So please don't leave. We weren't the only ones surprised by President Smith's desperate attempt to stop us. What are you saying to these subcontractors, President? They're just a lowly, poor subcontracting factory with no manners. Do you even know what you're talking about? Have you read the project documents? President Smith's thunderous rebuke fell upon Manager Will, who had spoken with a smug smile. He hadn't expected to be scolded and stood there with his mouth agape. Ignoring Manager Will, President Smith clung to my hand. I'll leave it to you and won't hold you accountable. Please participate in the project. Then I'll do as I please. I confirmed President Smith's firm nod. So, what about the social gathering? For today, we'll be leaving. We need to reconsider our approach moving forward. At my words, President Smith looked down in disappointment. I see. I'm truly sorry about this incident. After returning my greetings, we finally left the venue. As we were leaving, President Smith handed us a small note with David's name and phone number on it. I planned to call this number as soon as we got home. Of course, I also needed to report this to my father-in-law. As we hurried away, we could hear President Smith sternly reprimanding Manager Will behind us. The next day, Manager Will barged into my factory, his face bright red. Hey, get Joseph out here. Explain what's going on. As soon as he entered the factory, he started shouting. I received a call on my cell phone and headed to the reception room to face Manager Will, whose mouth was twitching with anger. How is it that your factory's parts are essential for the project? What's going on? All the details were included in the preliminary documents. Manager Will, you read those documents and decided you didn't need us, right? Perhaps surprised that I raised my voice for the first time, Manager Will fell silent. It seemed he was more fragile than I thought, unable to respond after just one remark. If that's all you have to say, please leave, I said, pointing to the exit. Manager Will weakly shook his head. Listen, the president told me you're not participating in the project. Your former president and our president are close, right? Please reconsider. After discussing with the former president, we decided to cancel the contract. There are plenty of subcontractors to replace us, right? At my words, Manager Will turned pale and began sweating profusely. I knew exactly why he was panicking. Without our factory, the project couldn't proceed. This project depended on using a product for which I held the patent. I had taken a different management approach than my father-in-law by securing patents. Alongside daily factory management, I had been prototyping the product I researched in college. With Nancy's help, who also studied at the same college, we succeeded in developing it after 2 years. Our patented product brought profit to the factory, improving our financial situation. Hearing about our success led to the initiation of this project. Without our product, the entire large-scale project would be cancelled. Manager Will, despite being a participant in the project, was unaware of this fact. Had he read the documents carefully, he would have understood our factory's importance. But he likely skimmed over them, assuming it was just a simple job for a subcontractor. Don't you have any sense of responsibility? What will you do if this project fails? If that happens, I suppose I'll have to take responsibility, but it's all right. We've already signed a contract with someone else. At my words, Manager Will gasped and widened his eyes. I almost laughed at his expression. Actually, on the day of the social gathering, I called the contact number President Smith had given me for David. I learned that David had established a new company. President Smith is supporting us. Would you consider signing a contract with us? David had explained in detail what happened when he left the previous company. He told me that he had faced harassment from Manager Will and tried to report it to the higher-ups. However, a faction led by the vice president favored Manager Will, and David's complaint was suppressed. Fearing he would collapse under the stress, David decided to resign. When he submitted his resignation, President Smith approached him, and they established a new subsidiary company. President Smith had also been struggling with the vice president's faction's schemes. However, their influence had reached the core of the company, and even as president, it wasn't easy to restructure the management. So, he had been gradually transferring talented employees to the subsidiary, centered around David. Following the recent events, President Smith introduced my factory, which makes essential products, to David's company. I am now set to sign a contract with David's company. When I explained this, Manager Will turned red with anger. Are you kidding me? If this project falls through, we'll face losses of billions. Just hurry up and re-sign with us. But it was you, Manager Will, who said you didn't need us first, right? We've already signed a new contract and are participating in the project with another company. So it's impossible to contract with you. Despite Manager Will's repeated pleas, I firmly refused each time. After about 30 minutes of this exchange, he finally realized it was pointless and sank to his knees. Eventually, we watched as he left the factory, hunched over, and we returned to our usual work. A few months later, President Smith visited the factory again. Since then, he had been working to rebuild the company, countering the vice president's faction, including Manager Will. I caused you so much trouble this time. I can't apologize enough. Smiling to me, President Smith began to explain what had happened since. When Manager Will first joined the company, he was competent, but once he caught the vice president's eye, he started behaving recklessly. Even before the trouble with me, he had caused similar issues in various departments. However, because of his strong connection with the vice president, no one could reprimand him. As a result, Manager Will developed a misguided confidence, believing he could do anything. That's why, during the recent social gathering, he unnecessarily picked a fight with us, subcontractors he didn't like. Even after being reprimanded by the president, Manager Will showed no signs of remorse. I did my job the way I saw fit. There are countless factories out there, so it doesn't matter how I treat them. His brazen attitude angered the usually gentle President Smith, leading to his transfer to another department. To be fair, Will was appointed manager while I was on an extended business trip abroad. I received reports but judged only by performance numbers, not understanding his character. I'm sorry for the trouble this caused. President Smith apologized to me once again. Sometime later, I received news from an acquaintance that former manager Will had resigned. The vice president was held accountable for many issues and resigned. But Will, although not fired, was subjected to cold stares from everyone at the company as word of his behavior spread. Though not dismissed, he was transferred to a dead-end department, tasked with compiling the company's history, a role with no sense of purpose. Unable to bear it, Will eventually resigned on his own. He had a terrible personality, but he was supposed to be smart. Hearing the story, Nancy murmured that Will did indeed have talent. On paper, he had achieved enough to be recognized by President Smith for the position of manager. But as a result, Will became overconfident and caused the recent incident. Maybe he went rogue because of me, I said. Apparently, Will, who was a classmate of Nancy's in high school, had feelings for her. However, To get her attention, he often belittled the factory run by Nancy's father, causing her to dislike him completely. I told him, "Don't ever talk to me again, and I don't want you anywhere near me," and that was the end of it. As Nancy declared, after graduating high school, Will had no contact with her. But after becoming a working adult, he learned that his company did business with Nancy's factory and, with the confidence of his managerial position, tried to reconnect with her. However, she was already married to me with a child in elementary school, which must have shattered his expectations. To harass you out of jealousy is so immature. I'm really sorry for the trouble he caused you. Nancy apologized, clasping her hands together. Of course, I wasn't angry at all. Instead, I felt proud of how Nancy handled the situation firmly. And I felt confident that we could overcome any future challenges at the factory together. After his resignation, Will tried hard to find a new job, but rumors of the recent incident followed him, leading to repeated rejections. With his savings exhausted and having left his home, Will fell into a poor lifestyle, working day-to-day jobs to make ends meet and borrowing money to cover living expenses. Holding multiple jobs, he had to apologize to supervisors younger than himself, which hurt his pride. As a result, he couldn't stick with any job and kept changing workplaces. Nowadays, as soon as he gets some money, he spends it on cheap beer, getting drunk every day. He receives complaints from other residents at his cheap apartment. It seems he might end up on the streets soon. Meanwhile, I continue to work with my factory colleagues as a manager. Our relationship with David's new company is strong, and we are satisfied with our enthusiastic business dealings. President Smith's company is slowly but steadily recovering. My father-in-law and I look forward to resuming business with them one day. With Tom now in middle school and more independent, Nancy has more time to help with the factory work. For the sake of my family and our important factory, I will keep putting in my best effort. No matter what new problems arise, I am confident we can overcome them together. I will make Nancy's dream of making this factory the best in the USA come true. With this hope, I step into the factory each day, believing that if I think I can do it, I will succeed.